Hey, Kathy, thank you so very much. Thanks for watching Zoom into Books and joining us and waking up early from Southern California to do our broadcast, which we appreciate very much, is author Kevin Miller. He's written this fascinating book called Heart of Steel, and you can check it out at heartofsteelbook.com and also Amazon.com, BarnesandNoble.com, all your online book retailers. Kevin, you've got an amazing story that goes along with this book. So first of all, thanks for joining us, and I hope that you and your family are doing well and are okay.
Oh, yeah. Thanks, Burke. I'm really looking forward to talking to you today. And we're doing good. We're doing good out here. We're hanging in there.
You know, you told me something interesting before we get into the specifics on the book, that you are pretty confident that COVID-19 visited your home earlier than has been reported in the news that it visited other folks. Tell me about that.
Yeah, no, I really do believe that, Burke, and it's interesting because it seems like there's a lot of other people saying the same thing now.
Right. Yep.
There seems to be a lot of folks. I think this virus has been around a lot longer than that. Late November, early December, we came down with it. My daughter, my 13-year-old, had it, and she had the problems with the lungs, couldn't breathe and such. And then I got it, and it was just like a dry cough. I couldn't. All the symptoms that I'm reading and listening to people who had it, I'm like, that's exactly what we had. My wife, Annette, she got it in her lungs really bad. I was thinking I was just about to take her to the ER, but she fortunately recovered, and before we knew what it was. So, yeah, I'm about 99.9% sure that we did have it in our household.
I'm glad that everybody's doing okay now, and I appreciate you taking time to join us. Kevin, Your background includes service in the United States Air Force. We thank you for your service. And also, you've done web design. You were a certified personal trainer for a long time. But what brought you to this book, I think, is fascinating, and that is you found out that essentially your entire life, as a matter of fact, your name was all a lie. It was all made up, and it changed the trajectory of your life forever, and you began to unpeel that onion and find out all about it. So in fact, when I say our guest is author Kevin D. Miller, you're not Kevin D. Miller at all. And it's not a pen name. It's a name that was given to your family. What's your real last name?
Yeah, it was given to my family by my grandfather, who changed our name from Miller to Pulchalski, a very Polish name that we didn't really, my dad didn't even know that his name was that. And he, later in years and stuff, but he took that secret to his grave to cover a family tragedy.
Wow. And so specifically for folks who haven't read the book yet, and the book, by the way, is Heart of Steel, and you can find it at heartofsteelbook.com. How did you find out to begin with that the Miller was not your name?
The first way we found out, Burke, is we had an uncle that went to a funeral, and we'd gotten hold of some old newspaper articles from 1920 that kind of, talked about a murder that occurred in a little township of Southington near Warren, Ohio, back in 1920. And the newspaper articles spread out for about a week or so, showing kind of the progression of the investigation and stuff that went on. So not only were we shocked to find out that our name was Pulchalski, not Miller, we were shocked to find out why, and the tragedy and the murder and the investigation that went on, because we were reading all these articles, over a period of about a week or so. And it was just, it was shocking, devastatingly shocking.
By the way, if you have any questions or comments for Kevin D. Miller, you can send them to us on Facebook Live or in our Zoom into Books chat room, and I'll be happy to pose those to Kevin. If you're interested in family history and genealogy, any of that, I'm sure Kevin has done hundreds of hours of research in order to write Heart of Steel. We'd love to hear from you, so send your questions and comments in now. How old were you when you first found this out from these old newspaper clippings at a funeral?
Originally, I was in my 30s.
Wow, you're in your 30s, and suddenly the rug gets pulled out from under your entire family.
Oh yeah. It was something that just, it was kind of a fluke that we came across this, because like I said, my grandfather did a good job of hiding this secret that he took to his grave. But what had happened was we had some cousins who were actually had a person doing some genealogy, and he came across these things, and then they just kind of passed it on to us, and then we took it, and and then I took hold of that, and we really didn't do much with it for a few years until we just kind of decided, we need to write this book.
Right.
My dad asked me that, please write the book,
So there probably would have been, and maybe I shouldn't say probably, let me ask you, was there some dissension in the family ranks? I mean, as you began to uncover this story that involved a murder in your family and lots of other pretty tough stuff, your grandfather wanted that name change. He wanted all that buried for a reason. So,
Right.
Did you and your siblings or your cousins, was there some disagreement about whether you should bring this story out? I would assume there would have to be.
Yeah, we kind of struggled with it a little bit, I think more of my dad and I and my brothers and sister, we kind of sat down and talked about it and thought, is this the right thing to do? It's obviously he wanted this kept secret. I mean, because it was conflicting. It's like, do we tell the story? Is Grandpa going to be upset if we put that story out there?
Right.
And so we struggled with it, but to make a long story short, we finally concluded it's like, this man was an incredible person to do this at such a young age. He was 12 years old, almost 13 when this happened. It's a story that had to be told. I have so much more respect and love for my grandfather, even more so knowing what he went through. And I needed to tell that story. I wanted to tell it for my dad because that's his dad, and he did. He originally wanted to do the story, but he just didn't really know how to do it, and he asked me, he handed it all to me and says, would you write this, and I said, yeah, absolutely. I'll give it my best shot because we want the world to know about it. And I think it's an inspiring story that people will relate to and they'll be inspired by it.
The book we're talking about is Heart of Steel, and we're talking with author Kevin D. Miller, who joins us from Southern California on Zoom Into Books. If you have questions or comments about the book, or you'd like to chime in with Kevin, we'd love to hear from you in the Zoom Into Books chat room, or you can send us your comments and questions on Facebook Live. I'd like to take a look at the cover of the book, and while we're pulling the cover of the book up, Kevin, it's interesting to me that there was all this discussion within your family about doing a book or telling the story, I guess, first, because by trade, you're not an author. And so when your dad said you should tell this story, was that conversation the next one? Well, I'm happy to tell the story, but I'm not an author. I don't know how to write a book.
Yeah, I'll tell you, that was a real learning experience. Now, I have a lot of technical writing experience, but it does not really translate to authoring a novel. And I have the utmost respect for folks who have that gift, of writing. It took me 3 years to write the book, and a lot of that time was also learning how to write and reading books and taking classes and doing, looking at YouTube videos to learn how to write, to try to figure out how am I going to tell this story, so I think it came together really, really well. And I think the technical writing did help too, because just having those that skill set, it got me started, to learn, but it was a challenge.
So we're looking at the cover of the book based on a true story by you, Kevin D. Miller, but pronounce your last name for me again. Pulchalski?
Pulchalski, yeah. It's Puchalski, but the C is silent. I learned, and I had to find out. I actually went up to a Facebook Polish site and joined and asked them. I said, "Somebody tell me how to pronounce this name properly." And that's what I got back was the C was silent. So Pulchalski. At first, I was saying Pulchalski, but it's actually Pulchalski.
See, it's amazing. The whole story is amazing to me. You're a grown man in your 30s, and you've got to log on to social media to find out how to pronounce your own last name.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay, so we're looking at the cover of the book of Heart of Steel, and at the top there's the headline, Murdered in Bed as He Lay Asleep. So let's start with that. What's the story or the core of the story that caused your grandfather to completely whitewash his family's name, to change the family name and bury this amazing secret? So tell me the genesis of that story.
Sure. Yeah. Well, what the articles said, we found, was that my great-great-grandfather, George Pulchalski, was murdered in his sleep. Apparently three men broke into their house, stole $600, and tied and gagged my great-grandmother to a chair, went in and murdered him, shot him in the right temple with a .25 caliber pistol, made off with the money, and then ran away. Well, my grandfather woke up and, came across my grandmother. She was frantic, and she told him the story of what happened, and she sent him to get the sheriff. So he goes running off at 12 years old, fetches the sheriff, brings the sheriff back. So now the sheriff and all the, the police of that day get involved and start doing some research and start investigating to see what happened. And the story kind of goes along, and then it kind of starts to take some different twists and turns, a couple different spins here. So it's kind of shocking how it kind of evolves and what actually really happened, which I'll leave you. If you read the book, you'll find out what really happened in the story. But that's how it got all started. That's what got everything pushing forward here.
And I'm curious as to when these newspaper articles show up at the funeral home, and you're a guy in your 30s, how was it presented to you guys, to you and your dad? Did somebody say, I think our family is somehow involved in this, although the last names are different? Or how did they put the puzzle pieces together that this murder in 1920 was actually involved your great-grandparents?
As I mentioned earlier, because of the, I think it was the gentleman that did the research, the ancestry research. He was doing some genealogy, and he actually tracked my great-grandparents, Stella and George, and learned of their real name, and then came across the newspaper articles. So it was kind of a genealogist that kind of initially started bringing this stuff to light, and then revealed that stuff to our cousins, who then handed it to my uncle and said, "Hey, you might want to read these because your real last name isn't Miller." And then my uncle got hold of us, and he didn't tell us for first few days. We're like, what's our name? Tell us.
Wow.
And he finally sent those to us, and then we were able to read the story. And then we obtained, there was a lot more newspapers, because then I'm like, okay, let's go to the library in Warren. So we obtained, there was a few more articles that we were able to obtain from the Warren Public Library.
We're looking at a photo now of your great-grandparents, and I know the story. You talked about this murder, and I don't want to give away everything that's in the book, but as I look at this picture, and maybe I'm reading a little bit more into it than I should because I know the story, but your great-grandfather looks very stern. He's got sort of this glare at the camera, and if you look at your great-grandmother there, and this is their wedding photo,
yeah,
she looks scared. She looks nervous. Do you see that, or am I reading too much into it?
No, I think I see that too, Burke. Because now this was an arranged marriage in Poland. It was actually arranged when Stella was 13, and then she immigrated to the U.S., came by herself. He was 10 years older than her. So in this picture, I think she was 16 and he was 26. My great-grandfather, he was a very, let's say, abusive man. He was a rich farmer. He was a good old boy and a drunk. He liked his whiskey and his vodka. And when he would drink, he would get very mean and abusive, so the household, there's a lot of family, some domestic violence going on in the story initially. And yeah, even looking at that picture, you can kind of see that.
Yeah, you can infer it for sure. Your grandfather, who was the little boy that found his father dead and his mother frantic, your grandfather's name was Stanley, right?
Stanley, yeah. Stanley William Puchalski.
Now, was he around did you have a relationship with Stanley?
I had a very close relationship with him. He died in 1986. The last time I saw him, I was actually in the Air Force, and I flew up to Wright-Patterson for a class, and then he flew me over to up around Canton, where he was living in a cabin. But I was real close. Grandfather, even though we lived in Arizona and he lived in Ohio, my grandparents would come out and stay for months on end. They would rent an apartment so they could spend time with us, and we'd go back and visit Ohio. But yeah, I was close to the man.
Wow. The book, by the way, is Heart of Steel. Kevin D. Miller is our guest today on Zoom Into Books. If you have questions or comments for Kevin, send them to us in our Zoom Into Books chat room. the Zoom room, as we like to call it. And you can also send them over to us on Facebook Live. The book is available, and Kevin will inscribe it for you at heartofsteelbook.com. That's right, correct? Heartofsteelbook.com is your website?
Okay. Yes, heartofsteelbook.com.
I think we've got a couple of more pictures here. Let's see what's next. So these are some of the newspaper articles that were uncovered. And when you started into this research, were you surprised with what you found? I mean, there had to have been some aha moments where you went, wow, this is getting more and more amazing.
Yeah, there's a lot of aha moments and with the book and with the story that you're going to find, because it's going to lead you one way and then take you another way. There was all kinds of twists and turns. I mean, the real life story read like a novel, and that's the other thing too. I mean, this is a true story. It's a memoir biography, but it's written like a novel. I mean, it's fast paced, it's cinematic. You're living the story through Stanley's eyes, so it's pretty intense and emotional. And a lot of folks write me all the time saying, okay, it made me cry. Even my buddies, my macho buddies, I'm like, this is going to make you cry. They'll call me up and say, oh man, because it does. I said, hey, be ready, man, because it's pretty emotional, pretty impactful.
Well, you talk about it being cinematic, and in fact, it's being made into a movie right now. There's a screenplay being made. And for a historical book like this, I wonder if you can give our viewers and our listeners some thoughts on how to go about researching their own family history, because you're bound to find some interesting stuff. Perhaps not a secret murder that happened with a whole major twist and a story that goes on after that, but lots of folks I think would like to find out more about their family's past, and I'm curious as to sort of if you give us the detail a bit on how you went about doing this, because you're not a genealogist, you're not a historian, you're just a guy who wanted to find out why his whole family history was different and his name was changed. How do you start?
That is true. And I'm not a genealogist, but the places that we started obviously were the newspapers, but that led to talking to family members, especially if you have older family members who are still alive. You would be surprised the things that they know that they've never told you. And a lot of times it's because no one ever asks.
Right.
So my dad was very valuable in this. Obviously, he knew a lot. He has cousins his age, the children of the siblings. So rounding those things up, rounding old documents up and letters and stuff, just trying to getting with the family members and finding out everything they know. Let's put everything together that the family knows. And then from that point, then I got onto Ancestry and 23andMe, did my DNA, and 23andMe doesn't just give you your DNA. It also kind of shows you where that DNA is from, the location in Poland where my relatives are from. And then Ancestry, then now that I have names and different, information there, I'm able to plug that in and find more information out about, that. So that's where you start. I start with family, go there first, find out everything that everybody knows, and then put all that together in a database or however you organize yourself, and then start using the tools like the Ancestry. And if you can afford it, hire a genealogist. They're really good at what they do and really good at digging stuff up, as we found out here.
You mentioned that you eventually did use the services Ancestry.com and 23andMe.com, and there's been some negative coverage in the media about those services as they become more and more prevalent, because frankly, people are uncovering things that they wish they wouldn't, siblings they never knew they had, and, family secrets and family lies. And you're kind of the poster child for all that. So any advice there? Do you tread gently? I mean, what do you do in that case?
That's really a personal choice, because that's the thing. That's the question you have to ask yourself. It's like, am I going to be okay if I find things out that I don't want to find out? And it does, and it affects other people. I mean, it doesn't just affect you. You might find something out that might affect another person's life that they don't want people to know about. There's information there. So there's a lot of, it's kind of a two-edged sword. I mean, it goes either way, because some of this information you might just want to keep in the closet forever and keep it there, like, you know, and maybe it doesn't, certain families might feel it doesn't belong out there. In my personal case, I decided to just open the closet door and, you know, and expose all this, because I thought there was a lot of value to it in the story itself to share with people, that people would relate to it, that even though it's a painful truth, it is my history and I embrace it, and it's where I'm from, and it's part of what made me who I am and made, you know, my family, my brothers, my sister, my dad, my, you know, where we are. We know where we come from. I'm okay knowing that information. I don't think everybody would be, and you do have to be cautious when you start, you know, digging around, you know, looking for things.
You open that can of worms, you can't close the can.
Right.
Kevin Miller is our guest today on Zoom Into Books. The book is Heart of Steel, and you can get an autographed copy now at heartofsteelbook.com. We saw a cemetery in the last slide, and now it looks like this is part of that farm property. So you made a pilgrimage back to this little town outside Warren, Ohio. Was it the first time you had been there when you started researching for the book, or had you been there before?
Well, I'm from Canton. I was born in Canton, but I've never been to Warren, where my grandfather was actually born. And I went on a trip. I took my dad. My dad said, he says, "You're not going there without me," you know. So we had to get him a ticket. And then my younger brother Craig also came along. So the three of us journeyed back there in search of whatever we could find. And we wanted to find the property, you know, because we didn't know exactly where it was or how big it was. And we finally, you know, we went to the county records at Warren, and we finally found the deed, which didn't have an address, but it had a description of the property. And then I had an historian send me this plat map that you see, that the deed matched identical to the, you know, the plat map. So we found it. And, you know, I created this map, and I kind of did a Google overlay there to show you how big it is. It's about 95.3 acres, 98.3 acres, something like that. It was a huge, huge property. But the picture on the left is part of it there. There's some house. I don't think the original house is there anymore. Probably was tore down, you know, maybe because of the history of it. But I am going to go back there, and I'm going to knock on some of these doors and ask them if I can walk the property, because I just really would just love to just kind of just walk that property, you know.
The cemetery that we saw, you did some research there. You walked through the cemetery, and what did you find there? Are there records available at the cemetery that were helpful to you?
Yeah, according to the newspaper and to the death certificate, my grandfather was buried in St. Mary's Cemetery. The funeral took place at St. Mary's Church. So they have the records. Now, we went there looking for his grave. I wanted a picture of his grave and to visit his grave as well. And the church had the records. They said, yes, George Pulchalski is here, and he's buried with 3 of his infant children and another woman in her 30s. I'm assuming it was a sibling. But when we walked the property, we couldn't find it. You know, there's a lot of old graves back there that are just washed away, that, you know, you can't read them anymore. And we don't know if it wasn't marked. We went back to the church, and their records for that year, 1920, they didn't have the records. You know, they had a spreadsheet that they knew he was there. They just didn't know where he was there. So, you know, my dad was a little upset by that. He's like, how can you lost my grandfather, you know? And it's like, well, there's nothing that they could do. They've had historians walk that cemetery and you know, kind of catalog all the graves, but they didn't have it recorded, and we couldn't find it as well either, even though we know he's buried there.
Your grandfather, you knew him, of course, as an adult. Tell me about your granddad, Stanley.
My granddad, Stan, well, as an adult, the way I knew him, he was a kind of a man that if he was sitting there talking to you, Burke, he would want to know about your life. You know, he didn't want to talk about himself. You know, he was always interested in you. What are you up to? You know, what's going on in your life? And he was you know, I always saw my grandfather as just a tough guy, just a really rough, tough guy growing up. I didn't see the tender side of him until I was a grown man, and, you know, months before he passed away from cancer. But and that's another thing too. He would never complain about anything. I mean, when I visited him, he'd already had cancer, and he didn't even mention it. You know, he never complained. He was still working and building stuff. You know, he was a man that could build things with his hands. He could lay tile. I mean, he was one of those guys who could do anything. He could build anything, build his own cabin. One of those kind of guys, just a self-made man. And he was a person that just took care of his family. He was the stone, the cornerstone, the patriarch in our family that everybody, leaned on for things. So that's how I saw him. He was a strong man. I always felt safe around him. He had a temper, and he passed that down to my dad. And, I guess I got a little bit of a temper too. I don't know, those things are genetic or not, but, he was never abusive, not in that regard, but he was just a tough guy, and he got in a fight in a bar when he was like 50 some years old because some guy made a remark about my Uncle Rick, who was playing for Murray State at the time, and made a comment about him or something. So he made him mad. But that's just kind of guy he was, he had a good heart, but he wasn't perfect.
And Kevin Miller's our guest today. The book is Heart of Steel and available at heartofsteelbook.com if you'd like an autographed copy. Takes place after this horrific murder because, your great-grandmother is distraught. Your great-grandfather is dead. So what happens to your grandfather and his siblings then? Yeah,
as the story goes on, eventually they wind up in a orphanage in Warren, a children's home, and on their own, by themselves, all alone, on their own. And in 1920, these places were not good places. They weren't good places to be. And they decided they're getting the heck out of there, So they made a plan. My grandfather actually ran away. He climbed out a window and ran away with the intent to go find a job, find work, and save enough money to come back and steal his siblings away from that orphanage. He ended up hopping a train, didn't know where he's going, and he finds himself in Chicago, and he gets a job in a steel mill in Chicago. And he just, has a Polish couple take him under his wing. He kind of gets involved with some bootlegging. It was the era of bootlegging. And he makes enough money, and then he goes back and attempts to get his siblings out of the orphanage. So that's kind of the next part of the story, is whether or not they make it out.
How many siblings again?
He had 4 siblings. His sister was the older. Sophie's the oldest one. She was 15. Stanley was 12 going on 13. And then there's Frank, and he's standing there in his wrestling gear right there. And then there's Annie, who's the younger sister, and then Billy is the baby.
Take us through these pictures that we see on the screen now from left to right.
You betcha. Upper left there is a Warren Children's Home that's now torn down. It's now a parking lot for a hospital, their local hospital in Warren. It's no longer there. Left down, that's the Southworks Steel Mill in Chicago. That's where he landed on the train, and that's where he wandered into and found work. And then the upper middle there, that's in the wrestling outfit there. That's my great uncle Frank. He did some wrestling. He owned a large brewing company too at one point, and he did pretty well for himself. The siblings there, that picture right below him, Stella's kind of in the middle there. Frank's to the left. That's my grandfather, Stanley, with the mustache. And then to his left, the right of the picture, is Annie, the youngest sister. And then to the right of that picture is my great aunt, Sophie, who changed her name to Dorothy. We called her Aunt Dorothy. She called herself Aunt Dorothy for years, but originally her name was Sophie. And then my grandparents up there. That picture right there is my grandma M and my grandfather Stanley, and that's the last picture I took of him. That's when I visited them in Canton, Ohio, months before he passed away, shortly after that.
The book Heart of Steel is available at heartofsteelbook.com, at Amazon, at Barnes & Noble, and it's just a fascinating story of a man whose entire family history was a surprise to him. His name was changed, and he learned a whole lot as he peeled back the onion of history. Kevin, you've got this screenplay in the works for Heart of Steel, but you've also started working on another book that I want to mention very briefly because Headline Books is headquartered in my home state of West Virginia, and your next book has a West Virginia tie-in.
Yes, it does. The title of the next book, which I finished, by the way, it's ready to go to editing, is White Skies, Black Mingo. And now it's a story based on my great-great-grandmother, who was Mingo Indian. She was Ohio Seneca. And she married my great-great-grandfather, who was Irish, Charles Flagg. So kind of, they had a mixed marriage back in a time, that really wasn't accepted, but it's a love story. Now, I don't know as much doing the research. I know that my great-great-grandfather, Charles Flagg, was in the Civil War. I know what regiment, I know the battles he fought, and I know a little bit about my great-great-grandmother and where they lived. She's buried in Wheeling, West Virginia. But most of this story is going to be historical fiction, just because I just don't know their history. So I created a story around them. So it's going to be historical fiction, mostly fiction. But I have to say now, my critique partner is my wife, who's an avid reader, and she loved Heart of Steel, but she calls this book her obsession. She was, I like this one even better. This is great, and I can't write the chapters fast enough for her, to read them. So, but we're at the point now that it's going through some self edits, and then we're going to turn it over to a professional editor, and then go from there, and we'll get that one released hopefully in the next month or two.
It's interesting to me that this family secret of your whole name being changed led you to write a book about that, and now it's led to a whole new career where you're an author and you're writing historical fiction. So it's really changed the trajectory of your life in a great way.
It has. I mean, I fell in love with writing that first book. I fell in love with writing, and I'm sitting here thinking, man, I wish I would have done this years ago. I wish, and after the learning, the research that goes into it, and just the love of telling a story. I mean, I just love telling a story, a good story, and I think that's what's important. I mean, like I'm learning as I go. But one of the things that I did learn from listening to authors and stuff is tell a good story. If you got a good story, people are going to read it and follow along. And I'm loving this.
I'm looking at the one sheet where you won a reader's favorite 5-star award. It's an Amazon #1 bestseller. And you look at what's in the book, and you can understand why it's going to be made into a movie. There's a murder mystery. There's an orphanage, and how scary was that for all of us as a kid? Oh, we're going to ship you off to the orphanage,
right?
There's a great escape, from the orphanage. There's gangsters and speakeasies, and finally this incredible love story of your grandparents. It feels very cinematic, and I wonder as you look back on this, does it seem like that's real? Does it seem like this really could have happened? Because it's almost the story is just amazing, and for it to be a whole different name and a whole different nationality. You didn't even know you were Polish, right?
Right. No, we did not know we were Polish.
It's crazy.
I did not know. Right. Exactly. I mean, my grandmother is Irish. She's from Ireland, so we knew we had a lot of Irish in us. And it's funny because my grandfather always said he was German, even though he knew he was Polish. Just to throw things off, always throwing stuff off. And he even told a story to my dad, who he just realized this, recently, that he goes, yeah, your grandmother went to prison for a little while for bootlegging. Well, she really didn't, but he just was covering a lot of things up, and just trying to protect his family and make sure that we had a good life. And that's kind of person he was. But so, yeah, and it was a thrill to win the reader's favorite award, to be able to put that badge on the book, and to make it to a #1 bestseller back in November. That was really exciting. So very exciting stuff, Burke. I mean, I'm just the story is it is cinematic, and it does seem. I do have a lot of people that say, I have to remind myself that this really happened to somebody, because it is an incredible story that took place. So. Yeah, it's worth the time. It's a story that you're going to need some tissues, because it's going to make you cry. I mean, you will. You're going to get emotional. It starts out pretty intense, but it finishes with a really beautiful love story of my grandparents and their love for each other. And the overarching idea here with Stanley is that family. You take care of your family, no matter what. you take care of your family. It's family love. It's looking out for each other. We can we can disagree and stuff, but in the end, we're family, and we have to take care of one another.
I would imagine you have a whole new respect for your grandfather. Certainly, you look at him in a whole different lens now than the guy that you thought you knew.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I do. He had a wonderful sense of humor as well, too. You know, he was pretty funny. And but yeah, I didn't see the levels, the depth of him that I saw writing this book. And I kind of, as writing the book, I was just kind of felt like I was channeling his spirit in, you know, because I put myself in his spot and say, okay, I'm 13 years old. What would I do? You know, I'm his grandson, so I kind of know how he thinks and stuff, and I just really tried to live the story through his eyes, you know, as these things, and tried to feel what he was feeling, you know, and I got emotional myself writing the book. There's some moments there that I had to kind of step back because it's pretty, you know, it was pretty deep.
Kevin Miller, our guest today. The book is Heart of Steel, and as you can see on your screen, it's available at heartofsteelbook.com. Hey, thanks to Jeff in Los Angeles, California, for watching today, and we have Daniel in Charleston, West Virginia, and a whole bunch of other folks who have just sort of chimed in along the way to check out Heart of Steel and the book, and hopefully a movie will come soon. It looks like that's in the works. Congratulations on all your success, and best of luck with your next book. And before we go, any last thoughts on family history and what you would say to someone who's debating whether or not to put it all out there?
I would say, you know, just ask yourself if you're okay with what you'll find out, you know, the truth that you would learn. And if you are, I would encourage it, because it really, to me, it's learning who you are, where you came from, learning that your ancestors aren't perfect. None of us are perfect. We make mistakes, but we learn from them. And it's a good teaching moment, you know, and it's a good information to pass down to your own children. I think it bonds us as a family. You know, even ugly truths and stuff, that bonds us in who we are and where we came from.
Kevin Miller, thank you for your time today on Zoom Into Books. I appreciate it, and continued success.
Thank you so much, Burke. I appreciate it. Have a great day.
Thank you. And thanks to everyone who watched all over the world on Facebook Live and in our Zoom room at Zoom Into Books. I'm Burke Allen for Allen Media Strategies in Washington, D.C. For Kathy and Ashley and the whole gang at Headline Books, and for Shaylee Priya in our office. Thank you so much for watching and listening. Have a great day. Stay safe. Stay healthy. Bye, everybody.